The haunting wails of mourning carried across the cemetery as the sun blazed high in the Montana sky. Hannah Mercer fell to her knees before the freshly turned earth, her trembling fingers tracing the letters etched into the simple wooden marker. Typhoid had taken her mother just 3 days prior, leaving Hannah alone in a world that suddenly seemed vast and empty. At 22, she had never imagined burying the woman who had been her only family since her father's death 5 years ago. In the distance, Zachary Jenson watched from atop his chestnut stallion. The young cowboy had been passing through Willow Creek when he'd spotted the solitary figure in black. Something about her loneliness called to him, like a wounded animal crying out in the wilderness. His own heart knew that sound too well. Hannah's tears fell freely onto the soil. "I don't know what to do without you, Mama," she whispered. The modest grave was adorned only with wildflowers she had gathered that morning, purple lupine and yellow balsam root that her mother had always loved. "You were all I had left." She didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her. Startled, she looked up to see a man standing respectfully several feet away, his hat held in his hands. He was tall and lean, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his Stetson. "Beggin' your pardon, miss," he said softly. "I couldn't help but notice you were alone. It ain't right for someone to grieve by themselves." Hannah quickly wiped at her tears with a lace-trimmed handkerchief. "I'm quite all right, sir," she replied, though her voice betrayed her. "Name's Zach Jenson," he offered. "I was just passing through. I don't mean to intrude on your grief." "Hannah Mercer," she replied automatically, the social graces her mother had instilled in her taking over despite her sorrow. "And this is," her voice caught, "this was my mother, Eleanor." Zach nodded solemnly. "It's an honor, Mrs. Mercer," he said to the grave, then tipped his hat respectfully. The simple gesture brought fresh tears to Hannah's eyes. "Typhoid?" he asked gently. Hannah nodded. "It took her so quickly. 1 week she was fine, the next. She couldn't finish." Zach shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I lost my ma to the same back in '81. I was just 16. He didn't mention that he'd been alone ever since, drifting from one cattle outfit to another across 3 territories. Hannah looked up at him, seeing him properly for the first time. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 25 or 26. His sandy hair was in need of a trim, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, but there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "You needn't stay," she said. "I'm sure you have somewhere to be." Zach shook his head. "Not particularly, Miss Mercer. I was just riding through on my way to the ranch where I've taken work for the season." He hesitated, then added, "I could stay a while if you don't mind the company. No one should be alone at a time like this." Hannah wanted to refuse, to tell this stranger she had no need of his pity. But the thought of sitting alone by the grave until sunset, then returning to an empty house, was suddenly unbearable. "If you wish," she said finally. Zach nodded and took a few steps back, giving her space while remaining close enough for his presence to offer some comfort. He tethered his horse to a nearby tree and settled himself on a flat stone, silent and watchful. The minutes stretched into hours. Hannah spoke softly to her mother's grave, sharing memories and promises. Occasionally, she would glance over at the cowboy, expecting him to show signs of impatience. But he remained patient and respectful, his gaze alternating between the horizon and the grieving woman. As the afternoon waned, Hannah's grief gave way to exhaustion. She hadn't slept properly in days, between nursing her mother and making the funeral arrangements. Now that it was over, the enormity of her loss threatened to consume her. "Miss Mercer," Zach's voice broke through her thoughts, "the sun will be setting soon. You have far to go." Hannah looked up, surprised to see the golden light of late afternoon bathing the cemetery. "I live in town. It's not far." Zach nodded and stood, brushing dust from his denim trousers. "Would you allow me to escort you? These roads ain't always safe for a lady alone, especially near dark." Hannah hesitated. Propriety dictated she refuse. She barely knew this man, but something in his steady gaze reassured her. "That would be kind, thank you." She placed one last kiss on her fingertips and pressed them to her mother's marker before rising. Her legs, stiff from kneeling for hours, nearly gave way beneath her. Zach was at her side in an instant, his arm supporting her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured. The touch was brief but steadying. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, embarrassed by her weakness. "I haven't eaten today." Concern flashed across Zach's face. "That won't do, Miss Mercer. You need to keep your strength up." Hannah managed a weak smile. There's been little time for such things. They walked together to where his horse waited. "This is Rusty," Zach said, patting the chestnut's neck. "He's gentle as they come. Would you like to ride? I can walk alongside." Hannah shook her head. "The walk will do me good, I think, but thank you." Zach nodded and untied Rusty, leading him by the reins as they started down the dirt road toward town. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the soft clopping of the horses' hooves and the distant calls of nighthawks beginning their evening hunt. "Have you been in Willow Creek long?" Hannah asked eventually, feeling she should make some conversation. "Just arrived yesterday," Zach replied. "I've taken on work at the Broken Arrow Ranch for the season. Mr. Callahan seems a fair employer." "The Callahans are good people," Hannah confirmed. "Their daughter Sarah was in school with me. And you? Have you lived here all your life?" Hannah nodded. "My father moved us here from St. Louis when I was 8. He opened the general store in town. After he passed, Mother and I kept it running." "That's a lot of responsibility for a young woman," Zach observed. "It's all I know," Hannah replied simply. They crested a small hill, and the town of Willow Creek came into view below them. In the golden light of sunset, the collection of wooden buildings along the main street looked almost picturesque. Smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared evening meals, and lamplight began to glow in windows. "That's our store," Hannah said, pointing to a 2-story building with a wooden awning. "We live in the rooms above." As they drew closer to town, Hannah became aware of her appearance. Her black mourning dress was dusty from the cemetery, and her face was likely blotchy from crying. "What would people think, seeing her with this unknown cowboy, Mr. Jenson?" she began. "I appreciate your kindness today, but perhaps it would be best if I continued alone from here." Zach studied her face, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, Miss Mercer. I didn't mean to cause you any discomfort." "You haven't," she assured him quickly. "It's just that in a small town like this, folks talk," he finished for her. "I understand completely." They had reached the edge of town. Hannah stopped and turned to face him. "Thank you for your companionship today. It was a comfort." Zach tipped his hat. "It was the least I could do, Miss Mercer." He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need anything while I'm in the area, you can send word to the Broken Arrow." Hannah nodded, though she knew she wouldn't. "Safe travels, Mr. Jenson. And peace to you, Miss Mercer." Hannah watched as he mounted his horse and rode toward the livery stable at the other end of town. Only when he disappeared from sight did she turn and make her way to the store, her steps heavy with the knowledge that no one would be waiting for her upstairs. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the Montana spring well underway. Hannah rose from a fitful sleep and dressed mechanically in her black mourning clothes. The store needed to be reopened. They couldn't afford to keep it closed for long, but the thought of facing customers with their sympathetic looks and whispered condolences made her stomach clench. She managed a small breakfast of bread and jam, then descended the back stairs to the store. Everything was exactly as she had left it 3 days ago when her mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Dust had settled on the merchandise, and the ledger lay open on the counter, the last entry in her mother's careful handwriting. Hannah took a deep breath and began her morning routine. She swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and wrote out a list of inventory that needed replenishing. The familiar tasks brought a small measure of comfort. At 8 o'clock, she unlocked the front door and turned the sign to open. It wasn't long before the first customers arrived, Mrs. Patterson needing thread, Mr. Davis for tobacco, and the Wilson children sent for penny candy. Each offered condolences that Hannah acknowledged with a tight smile and a murmured "thank you." By midday, the steady stream of customers had taken its toll. Hannah's head throbbed, and every sympathetic glance felt like a fresh reminder of her loss. When the lunch hour brought a lull in business, she retreated to the back room and allowed herself a few moments of quiet grief. The bell above the door jingled, signaling a customer. Hannah quickly composed herself and returned to the front of the store, only to find Zach Jenson standing somewhat awkwardly by the counter, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Jenson," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Miss Mercer," he nodded. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Hannah replied, smoothing her apron. "How may I help you today?" Zach glanced around the store. "I find myself in need of a few supplies. Tobacco, if you have it, and perhaps some writing paper and envelopes." Hannah moved to gather the requested items, grateful for the ordinary transaction. "Will you be writing to family back home?" she asked, making polite conversation as she measured out tobacco. A shadow crossed Zach's face. "No family to write to, I'm afraid, but I like to keep a journal of sorts. Helps pass the time on lonely evenings." Hannah nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. "We have some nice leather-bound journals as well if you're interested." Zach smiled, the expression warming his weathered features. "That's mighty thoughtful, but I'll stick with the loose paper for now. Easier to carry when you're moving around as much as I do." As Hannah wrapped his purchases, she found herself curious about this solitary cowboy. "Have you been working ranches long, Mr. Jenson?" "Since I was 16, he replied. "Started as a wrangler in Wyoming, then worked my way up to full cowhand. Been all over Colorado, Idaho, even down to Arizona Territory for a spell." "That sounds like quite an adventure," Hannah said, though she couldn't imagine such a nomadic existence. "It has its moments," Zach admitted, "but it gets lonely on the trail. A man starts to wonder if there might be more to life than dusty cattle drives and bunkhouse tales." Their eyes met briefly, and Hannah felt an unexpected connection with this wanderer. They were both alone in the world, though in different ways. The moment was broken by the entrance of Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, whose eyebrows rose significantly at the sight of Hannah conversing with the unknown cowboy. "That'll be 85 cents, Mr. Jenson," Hannah said quickly, reverting to her business manner. Zach paid for his purchases, seeming to sense the shift in atmosphere. "Thank you kindly, Miss Mercer. I wish you a good day." As he left, Mrs. Thornton approached the counter. "Hannah, dear," she began, her voice heavy with concern, "who was that man? I don't believe I've seen him in town before." "A new hand at the Broken Arrow," Hannah replied evenly. "Just passing through for supplies." Mrs. Thornton's lips pursed. "I see. Well, dear, you must be careful." A young woman alone. People might talk. Hannah straightened her shoulders. "People often do, Mrs. Thornton. Now, what can I help you with today?" The older woman looked slightly taken aback by Hannah's directness, but proceeded to request fabric for a new dress. As Hannah measured out yards of calico, she couldn't help but wonder what Zach Jenson might be thinking as he rode back to the ranch. For the next 2 weeks, Hannah fell into a routine of running the store alone. The initial flood of sympathy from townsfolk gradually subsided, leaving her to face the reality of her new solitary existence. Evenings were the hardest. The small apartment above the store echoed with silence where her mother's voice should have been. Every few days, she made the trek to the cemetery, bringing fresh wildflowers to her mother's grave. On the fourth such visit, she was surprised to find a small bunch of Indian paintbrush already placed at the headstone. She looked around, but the cemetery was empty save for an elderly man tending a plot at the far end. The following Sunday, after church service where she sat alone in the pew she had once shared with her mother, Hannah overheard a conversation that caught her attention. "Did you hear about the incident at the Broken Arrow?" Mrs. Peterson was saying to a group of women. "That new cowhand Jenson, I believe his name is, stood up to the Carver brothers when they were roughing up young Tim Miller." "The Carvers are nothing but trouble," another woman agreed. "Always causing fights at the saloon." "Well, according to my Henry, this Jenson fellow didn't even throw a punch. Just stepped between them and Tim, cool as you please, and talked those hooligans down. Said if they wanted trouble, they could take it up with him out of town, away from decent folks." "And did they?" "No, backed down like whipped dogs. Henry says there's something about the man quiet-like, but you can tell he's seen his share of trouble and knows how to handle himself." Hannah found herself lingering to hear more, oddly pleased by this account of Zach's character. She had thought of him occasionally since their brief encounter at the store, wondering about his life on the ranch and whether he had visited her mother's grave. It was another week before she saw him again. She was closing the store on a Wednesday evening when the door opened, the bell jingling merrily. "We're just closing," she began, turning to find Zach standing there. "I apologize for the late hour, Miss Mercer," he said. "I can come back tomorrow if it's inconvenient." "No, it's quite all right," Hannah replied, strangely glad to see him. "What can I help you with?" Zach stepped further into the store. "I was hoping to purchase some coffee and sugar. We've run low at the bunkhouse and the cook's in a state about it." Hannah smiled at that. "I can certainly help." The regular amounts. As she gathered the items, Zach cleared his throat. "I hope you don't mind, but I've visited your mother's grave a couple of times when riding past. Left some flowers." Hannah paused, touched by the admission. "That was you. Thank you, Mr. Jenson. That was very kind." "Seemed right somehow," he said simply. "No one should be forgotten." Their eyes met, and Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Would you like some coffee before you ride back?" she asked impulsively. "I was about to make some for myself." Surprise flickered across Zach's face, followed by a genuine smile. "I'd like that very much, Miss Mercer, if it's not an imposition." "Not at all," she assured him. "And please call me Hannah." "Hannah," he repeated, the name sounding different in his low voice. "Then I insist you call me Zach." Hannah led him up the back stairs to the apartment. It wasn't until they reached the small sitting room that she realized this was the first time she had invited anyone up since her mother's passing. The thought brought a momentary pang, but it was followed by the certainty that her mother would have approved of the simple hospitality. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to one of two chairs by the small stove. "I'll just be a moment with the coffee." As she busied herself in the tiny kitchen area, she was acutely aware of Zach's presence. He sat somewhat stiffly, his hat on his knee, taking in the modest but comfortable surroundings. "You have a nice home here," he commented. "Feels lived in, if you don't mind my saying." "Thank you," Hannah replied, setting the coffee pot on the stove. "It's not much, but it's been home for a long time." While the coffee brewed, they talked of small things: the weather, news from town, the progress of spring planting. Hannah found Zach easy to talk to, his manner straightforward but never crude. There was an intelligence behind his words that suggested he'd had more schooling than the average cowhand. "Did you always want to work with cattle?" she asked as she poured the coffee into 2 cups. Zach accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. "No, can't say that I did. My pa was a blacksmith back in Ohio. I thought I might follow in his footsteps, but after he and Ma died, there wasn't much keeping me there. So you came west." "Like so many others," he agreed. "The open country suited me, I found. There's a freedom in it that I never knew back east." "Don't you ever get lonely?" Hannah asked, then immediately felt forward for asking such a personal question. But Zach didn't seem offended. "Often," he admitted. "The trail life isn't meant for forever, I don't think. Most men either drink themselves to an early grave or eventually settle down somewhere." He took a sip of his coffee. "This is mighty fine coffee, Hannah." "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about settling down someday?" Zach's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "More and more lately," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities until Hannah looked away first, her cheeks warming. "What about you?" Zach asked. "Have you always planned to stay in Willow Creek?" Hannah considered the question. "I never really thought about leaving. This was Papa's store and then Mother's and mine. It's all I know." She paused, then added softly, "But now that Mother's gone, I sometimes wonder if there might be something else out there for me." They talked for over an hour, the coffee growing cold in their cups as they shared pieces of their lives. Zach told her about his travels across the Western Territories, and Hannah spoke of her childhood in St. Louis before coming to Montana. When the mantel clock struck 9, Zach set down his cup. "I should be getting back. Mr. Callahan runs a tight outfit and we start early." "Of course," Hannah said, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for the company. It's been nice not to be alone tonight." Zach stood, hat in hand. "The pleasure was mine, Hannah, truly." She walked him downstairs and through the store to the front door. In the dim light of the oil lamp, his face seemed softer, less weathered. "Would it be presumptuous of me to call again?" he asked as she unlocked the door. "Perhaps Sunday after church if you're not otherwise engaged." Hannah's heart quickened. "I would like that very much, Zach." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. "Then I'll see you on Sunday." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze before releasing it. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Zach." As she watched him walk down the darkened street toward the livery where he had left his horse, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced since before her mother's illness. Hope. True to his word, Zach appeared after church that Sunday. Hannah spotted him waiting outside the white clapboard building, standing somewhat apart from the congregation, his best shirt and polished boots indicating he'd made an effort for the occasion. Several townsfolk noticed the exchange of greetings between Hannah and the cowboy, and she could feel curious eyes following them as they walked together down the main street. "I thought perhaps we might have a picnic," Zach suggested, indicating a basket he carried. "If you're agreeable, that is." "Mrs. Callahan was kind enough to pack some food when I mentioned I was coming to town." Hannah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "That sounds lovely. There's a nice spot by the creek just outside of town." They walked together to a grassy area beside the bubbling creek that gave the town its name. Willow trees provided dappled shade, and spring wildflowers dotted the ground with splashes of color. Zach spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the basket: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a jug of lemonade. "Mrs. Callahan seems determined to fatten me up," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Claims I'm too skinny by half." "She's known for her generous cooking," Hannah replied, accepting the plate he offered her. "The Callahans have always been good to their hands." They ate in companionable conversation, and Hannah found herself relaxing in Zach's presence. There was something genuine about him that set him apart from other men she had known. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and shared his own thoughts without dominating the conversation. "Tell me about your dreams, Hannah," he said as they finished the pie. "If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you choose?" Hannah leaned back against the trunk of a willow tree, considering the question. "I've always wanted to see the ocean," she admitted. "Mother used to describe it to me how vast it is, and how the waves sound against the shore. She saw it once as a girl before coming west." Zach nodded. "It's something to behold, all right. I saw the Pacific once, years back when I worked a cattle drive to San Francisco. It stretches out forever, like the sky turned liquid." "You've seen so much of the world," Hannah said, a touch of envy in her voice. "Parts of it anyway," Zach replied. "But seeing things isn't the same as having a home, people who care about you." He met her eyes. "I think you've had the better portion, Hannah, even with the sorrows." His words touched something deep within her. "Perhaps we're both missing something," she said softly. The moment hung between them, full of unspoken meaning. Zach's eyes dropped to her lips briefly before he cleared his throat and began gathering the remnants of their meal. "Would you like to see the ranch sometime?" he asked as they packed up the basket. "Mr. Callahan mentioned he needs some supplies from town. I could bring the wagon next Saturday and take you back with me for the afternoon. Mrs. Callahan has been curious about you." Hannah felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect. "I'd like that very much. I can have Thomas Jenkins watch the store for a few hours." They walked back to town together, their hands occasionally brushing, sending small thrills up Hannah's arm. At the door to the store, Zach hesitated. "Thank you for today, Hannah. It's been the most pleasant Sunday I can recall in a long while." "Thank you for suggesting it," she replied. Suddenly shy under his warm gaze, Zach reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped from her neat bun. The gesture was so tender it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Until Saturday, then," he said softly. "Until Saturday," she echoed. As promised, Zach arrived the following Saturday with the ranch wagon. Hannah had spent extra time on her appearance that morning, wearing her best day dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and arranging her dark hair in a style that was both neat and flattering. The 12-mile journey to the Broken Arrow Ranch passed quickly as they talked. Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in months at Zach's stories of cowboy mishaps and the antics of the ranch's menagerie of animals. "Mrs. Callahan has a particular goose that thinks it's a watchdog," he told her. "Chased the new hand halfway to the bunkhouse his first day. Poor fellow thought he'd signed on to wrangle cattle, not battle poultry." The Broken Arrow was one of the larger ranches in the area, with a substantial main house, several outbuildings, and rolling pastures dotted with cattle. As they approached, Hannah could see figures moving about, ranch hands at work, a woman hanging laundry, children playing. "It's lovely," she commented as they drove under the wooden arch that marked the entrance to the property. "It's a good place," Zach agreed. "Callahan runs it fair, and his wife makes it feel almost like a home." They pulled up to the main house, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and numerous windows. A plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 50s emerged as they arrived. "You must be Miss Mercer," she called out warmly. "I'm Elizabeth Callahan. We're so pleased you could visit." Hannah was welcomed into the Callahan home with genuine hospitality. Mrs. Callahan served refreshments while her husband, a tall man with a silvering beard, discussed ranch business with Zach. Their 3 youngest children, they had 7 in all, Mrs. Callahan proudly informed Hannah, peeked shyly at the visitor from behind doorways. "Zach tells us you run the general store in town." Mr. Callahan said to Hannah over coffee and fresh baked cookies. "That's a considerable responsibility for a young woman." "Yes, sir, but I've been helping since I was a girl. My father taught me the business thoroughly before he passed." "Gerald Mercer was your father?" Mr. Callahan looked impressed. "He was a fine businessman, honest as the day is long." "I did business with him several times." "Thank you, sir. That would have meant a lot to him." After refreshments, Zach offered to show Hannah around the ranch. Mrs. Callahan gave her a knowing smile as they left, causing Hannah to blush slightly. "Mrs. Callahan seems very fond of you," Hannah observed as they walked toward the horse corrals. Zach ducked his head, almost shyly. "She's taken it upon herself to mother all the hands, but especially those of us without family. Says it's her Christian duty, but I think she just has a heart big enough for the whole territory." The afternoon passed pleasantly as Zach showed her the operations of the ranch. Hannah was introduced to several other ranch hands, all of whom showed Zach a respect that spoke well of his standing among them. She watched him interact with the horses, noting the gentle way he handled even the most spirited animals. "You have a way with them," she commented as he calmed a nervous colt. "They're honest creatures," Zach replied, stroking the colt's neck. "They don't lie or judge. If you're fair with them, they'll be loyal to the end." As the sun began to lower in the sky, they walked to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The view was spectacular, rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, cattle grazing peacefully in the valley below. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed, taking in the vista. "Yes, it is," Zach agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking not at the landscape but at her. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Hannah felt her heart quicken. Zach took a step closer, his expression serious. "Hannah," he began, his voice low, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that Zach, Miss Mercer," Mrs. Callahan's voice called from below. "Supper's nearly ready." The moment broken, Zach stepped back with a rueful smile. "We'd best head down, Mrs. Callahan doesn't take kindly to folks being late to her table." The meal was a lively affair, with the entire Callahan family and several ranch hands gathered around a long table laden with food. Hannah found herself seated beside Zach, acutely aware of his presence as their arms occasionally brushed while passing dishes. "So, Miss Mercer," Mr. Callahan said as the meal progressed, "do you intend to continue running the store on your own?" "Yes, sir," Hannah replied. "It's been in our family for years, and it provides a good living." "It's a lot for one person," Mrs. Callahan observed. "Have you considered taking on help, or perhaps—" She glanced meaningfully between Hannah and Zach. "A partner?" "Martha," Mr. Callahan admonished gently, while Zach suddenly found great interest in his plate. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I'm managing for now," she said diplomatically, "but I haven't ruled out any possibilities for the future." After supper, with twilight deepening, Zach hitched up the wagon for the return journey to town. The Callahans bid Hannah a warm farewell, with Mrs. Callahan pressing a basket of leftovers and baked goods into her hands. "You must come again soon, dear," she insisted, hugging Hannah. Then, in a lower voice, she added, "He's a good man, our Zach, the best kind." The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out, a comfortable silence settling between them as the stars began to appear overhead. The night air carried a slight chill, and Zach wrapped a blanket around Hannah's shoulders. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "I'm glad," Zach replied. "The Callahans took to you right away. Mrs. Callahan was singing your praises while you were getting your wrap." Hannah smiled in the darkness. "She's a wonderful woman. You're fortunate to work for such a family." "I am," he agreed, "though I don't expect to be a ranch hand forever." "Oh." Hannah looked at his profile, outlined against the night sky. "What do you see yourself doing?" Zach was quiet for a moment. "I've been saving," he said finally. "For a few years now. I thought perhaps someday I might have enough for a small place of my own. Nothing grand like the broken arrow, but somewhere a man could put down roots." The implication hung in the air between them, not just a place, but a home, perhaps a family. Hannah's heart beat faster at the thought. When they reached the store, Zach helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the silver moonlight, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes were bright as they looked down at her. "I should go in," Hannah said, though she made no move to do so. "Yes," Zach agreed, equally stationary. Neither spoke for a long moment, the night sounds of the small town, a distant piano from the saloon, the occasional bark of a dog filling the silence between them. "Hannah," Zach said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "I'd very much like to call on you properly. With your permission." Hannah felt a surge of joy at his words. "I would like that very much, Zach." His smile was visible even in the dim light. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. The touch of his lips sent a thrill through her entire body. "Good night, Hannah," he whispered. "Good night, Zach." As Hannah watched him drive away toward the livery, she pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, a smile spreading across her face. Over the next few weeks, Zach became a regular visitor to the store and to the small apartment above it. He would ride into town whenever his duties at the ranch allowed, sometimes just for an hour in the evening, other times for a full Sunday afternoon. The townsfolk quickly took notice of the blossoming relationship. Most were supportive, especially those who had worried about Hannah being alone after her mother's death. A few, like Mrs. Thornton, raised eyebrows at the somewhat hasty courtship, but even they had to admit that Zach Jenson conducted himself with perfect propriety. On a warm evening in late June, Zach arrived at the store just as Hannah was closing. His expression was serious as he helped her lock up. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concerned by his unusual quietness. "Yes," he assured her, "but I need to speak with you about something important." "Would you walk with me for a bit?" Hannah nodded, curious and slightly nervous. They strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a golden glow over the landscape. "Mr. Callahan offered me a new position today," Zach said after they had walked in silence for several minutes. "Oh," Hannah felt a flutter of anxiety. "Does it involve leaving Willow Creek?" Zach shook his head. "No, quite the opposite. He's looking to expand the ranch's operations and needs a foreman for the new section. It would mean more responsibility, better pay, and—" He paused. "A small house of my own on the property." Hannah's heart leaped. "Zach, that's wonderful. You deserve it." "There's more," he continued, stopping to face her. They had reached a small rise overlooking the town, the creek glittering in the distance. "I told him I needed to think about it because my decision depends on something else entirely." He took her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Hannah, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but sometimes a person just knows when something is right." Hannah's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I never expected to find someone like you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You're strong and kind and beautiful, inside and out. I know I'm just a cowboy without much to offer, but everything I have and everything I am is yours, if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, a simple silver band with a modest pearl. "Hannah Mercer, Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Hannah couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. Then, with tears streaming down her cheeks, she nodded. "Yes, Zach. Yes, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Standing, he pulled her into his arms and, for the first time, kissed her properly, a tender, gentle kiss that promised a lifetime of love. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I wish your mother could have known you wouldn't be alone," he whispered. Hannah felt a bittersweet pang at the mention of her mother. "I think she knows," she said softly, "and I think she would have loved you." They stood together as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, holding each other and making plans for their future. The next morning, Hannah and Zach visited her mother's grave together. The cemetery was peaceful in the early light, dew glistening on the grass and wildflowers. "Mama," Hannah said softly as they stood before the simple marker, "I've come to share some news. This is Zachary Jenson, the man I'm going to marry." Zach placed a bouquet of fresh wildflowers at the grave. "I wish I could have met you, Mrs. Mercer," he said respectfully. "But I promise I'll take care of your daughter for as long as I live." Hannah felt a sense of peace wash over her. Though her mother was gone, she wasn't truly alone anymore. She had found love in the most unexpected place with a kind-hearted cowboy who had stayed with her until sunset on the darkest day of her life. The wedding took place in early September, when the first hints of autumn were beginning to touch the Montana landscape. It was a modest affair at the small church in Willow Creek, attended by the Callahan family, ranch hands from the Broken Arrow, and townspeople who had known Hannah all her life. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame. Mrs. Callahan had helped with the alterations, becoming something of a surrogate mother to the bride in the process. For something new, Zach had given her a delicate silver necklace with a small heart pendant, which gleamed at her throat as she walked down the aisle. Zach, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched her approach with undisguised adoration. The normally reserved cowboy had tears in his eyes as she reached his side and took his hand. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they exchanged vows, Hannah felt her mother's presence strongly, as though she were standing beside them, giving her blessing. The gold band Zach placed on her finger alongside the engagement ring symbolized not just their union, but a new beginning, a family rebuilt from loss and loneliness. After the ceremony, a celebration was held at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Callahan and the women of the town. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as people danced and celebrated. "Mrs. Jenson," Zach murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Hannah replied, smiling up at him. "Absolutely perfect." Later that evening, they rode in a decorated wagon to the small house on the Broken Arrow property that would be their first home. It was a simple 2-room cabin that Zach and the other hands had worked tirelessly to prepare over the previous weeks. A front porch faced west toward the mountains, and a small vegetable garden had been started beside the house. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," Zach said somewhat anxiously as he carried her over the threshold. Hannah looked around at the modest furnishings: a bed with a colorful quilt made by Mrs. Callahan, a small table with 2 chairs, a cooking stove, and shelves Zach had built himself. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "It's ours." In the soft glow of lamplight, they began their life together. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Hannah continued to run the store, riding to town with Zach in the mornings and back to the ranch in the evenings. They discussed eventually hiring help so that she wouldn't have to make the journey every day, especially once winter set in. Zach thrived in his new position as foreman, earning the respect of the men under his supervision through his fair treatment and willingness to work alongside them. Mr. Callahan increasingly relied on his judgment in matters of ranch management. Their small home became a haven, a place of warmth and love after days of hard work. Hannah added feminine touches that made the cabin cozy, and Zach built additional furniture as they needed it. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, talking about their day or sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence between them. One chilly evening in late November, as they sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, Hannah turned to her husband with a smile that held a secret. "I visited Dr. Matthews in town today," she said, her eyes shining. Zach immediately looked concerned. "Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" Hannah took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Not ill," she said softly, "just expecting." For a moment, Zach stared at her uncomprehendingly. Then understanding dawned on his face, followed by an expression of such pure joy that it brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." Hannah nodded, laughing as he whooped and swept her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch before setting her down with sudden care. "I didn't hurt you, did I? Or the baby?" he asked anxiously. "We're fine," she assured him, touched by his concern. "The doctor says everything appears normal. The baby should arrive in early summer." Zach placed his hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. "A little person," he marveled. "Part you, part me." "Our family," Hannah said, her voice full of emotion. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their small bedroom, Zach held her close, his hand protectively over her stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he whispered. "A wife, a child on the way, a place to belong. I was resigned to a solitary life." "So was I," Hannah admitted. "After Mother died, I couldn't see beyond my grief. I thought I would always be alone." "Thank God I saw you that day in the cemetery," Zach said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Something told me I needed to stay with you." "Until the sun went down," Hannah finished, remembering. "You gave me strength when I needed it most." "And you gave me a reason to stop wandering," he replied. "You gave me home." As winter settled over Montana, bringing snow and biting cold, the Jenson home remained warm and full of anticipation. Hannah's pregnancy progressed without complications, though morning sickness in the early months made the daily trips to town challenging. After much discussion, they decided to hire Thomas Jenkins' daughter, Sarah, to help in the store 3 days a week, allowing Hannah more rest. Christmas was a joyful celebration, with the Callahans insisting the young couple join them at the main house for dinner. Gifts were exchanged, practical items mostly, but Zach surprised Hannah with a beautiful rocking chair he had made in secret, working late hours in the ranch's workshop. "For when the baby comes," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes. "Every mother needs a good rocking chair." Hannah's gift to him was equally meaningful, a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, carefully repaired and engraved with their wedding date. "So you'll always know when it's time to come home to us," she said as he examined it with reverence. As Hannah's body changed with the growing child, Zach's tenderness toward her only increased. He took on more household chores, insisted she rest frequently, and would talk to her expanding belly each night, telling stories to the baby about the ranch and animals. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the swell of her abdomen where the baby kicked vigorously. "I don't know," Hannah replied truthfully. "Sometimes I think one, sometimes the other. Does it matter to you?" Zach considered this. "No," he said finally. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved. That's all that matters." In early March, a letter arrived that changed their plans for the future. Hannah's uncle in St. Louis, her father's brother whom she had not seen since childhood, had passed away. To her surprise, he had left her a modest inheritance, enough money to make significant changes in their lives if they chose. "What should we do with it?" she asked Zach as they discussed the unexpected windfall. He considered carefully, never one to make hasty decisions. "What do you want, Hannah?" "This is your family's money." "It's our family now," she corrected gently, "and I want whatever will give our child the best future." After several days of discussion, they made a decision. With Hannah's pregnancy advancing and the daily journey to town becoming more difficult, they would sell the store and use the inheritance along with the proceeds to purchase a small ranch of their own, closer to town than the Broken Arrow. Mr. Callahan was disappointed to lose his foreman but understood their desire for independence. "A man should have his own land," he said approvingly, "and you've learned enough here to make a go of it." With his help, they found a property 200 acres with a sturdy house, a barn, and good water access from the creek. It was smaller than the Broken Arrow but perfect for a family just starting out. The previous owner, an elderly widower with no children, was eager to sell to a young couple who would care for the land he had worked for decades. The transition was bittersweet for Hannah. The store had been her family's livelihood for so long, and selling it felt like closing a chapter of her life. But the joy of preparing for both the baby and their new home overshadowed any sadness. The Mercer General Store was purchased by a young couple from Helena who had always dreamed of running their own business. Hannah spent several weeks teaching them the operations and introducing them to the community before finally handing over the keys. By late April, Hannah and Zach had moved into their new home. The house was larger than their cabin at the Broken Arrow, 4 rooms downstairs and 2 upstairs, with a wide front porch and established garden. Zach immediately set about making repairs and improvements, while Hannah, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, arranged their belongings and prepared the nursery. "I never thought I'd own land," Zach marveled as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset over their property. A small herd of cattle, their start in the ranching business, grazed peacefully in the nearest pasture. "You've worked hard for it," Hannah replied, leaning against his shoulder, "and you'll make it thrive. I know you will." He placed his arm around her, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "We will," he corrected. "This is our dream now." The baby arrived in the early hours of a perfect June morning, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. The birth was long but uncomplicated, with Mrs. Callahan and the town midwife attending. Zach paced outside until the newborn's first cry rang out, then rushed in to find Hannah exhausted but radiant, holding their son. "Hannah," he breathed, approaching the bed with reverence. "You did it. He's perfect." "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked, her voice tired but happy. With trembling hands, Zach took the tiny bundle, cradling it with a care he usually reserved for the most fragile things. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your pa." They named him William Gerald Jenson, William for Zach's father and Gerald for Hannah's. He was a good baby, with a healthy appetite and a disposition as sunny as his mother's. Zach was an attentive father, eager to help with every aspect of the baby's care despite the demanding work of establishing their ranch. As summer progressed into fall, life settled into a new routine. Hannah recovered her strength and began to take a more active role in the ranch operations, often carrying William in a sling as she worked in the garden or helped with the lighter chores. Zach hired 2 hands to help with the cattle and made plans for expanding their herd the following year. 1 year after their wedding, they held a small celebration at their ranch, inviting the Callahans and friends from town. As twilight fell, Zach found Hannah standing at the edge of their property, William sleeping against her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Jenson," he said, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Happy anniversary," she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. "Can you believe how much has changed in just 1 year?" Zach shook his head, looking around at their home, their land, and then back at his wife and son. "From the moment I saw you in that cemetery, I knew my life would never be the same. I just never imagined it could be this good." Hannah reached up to touch his face, her eyes full of love. "Do you remember what you said to me that day? No one should be alone at a time like this." "I meant it," he said softly. "And now, because of you, because you stayed with me until the sun went down, I'll never be alone again." She smiled up at him, their son cradled between them. "None of us will." As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, they walked back toward their home, where friends waited and laughter filled the air, a family no longer defined by loss, but by the love they had found in each other. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Jenson family. Their ranch, which they named Willow Creek after the town and stream that had brought them together, slowly grew and prospered. Zach's knowledge of cattle and Hannah's head for business proved a formidable combination. William, or Will as they came to call him, grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassionate nature. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Alina, named for Hannah's mother. She had Hannah's dark hair but Zach's bright blue eyes and a spirit that was entirely her own. Life on a ranch was never easy. Harsh winters, dry summers, fluctuating cattle prices, and occasional illness tested their resilience. But through it all, Hannah and Zach faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. They made a tradition of visiting the cemetery in Willow Creek each year on the anniversary of Hannah's mother's death. As the children grew old enough to understand, they joined in placing flowers on their grandmother's grave and hearing stories about her life. "Your grandmother would have loved you so much," Hannah told them during one such visit when Will was 8 and Alina 5. "She was the strongest, kindest woman I ever knew." "Until you, Ma," Will said with the straightforward honesty of childhood. Hannah smiled, touched by her son's words. "That's sweet of you to say, Will." "It's the truth," Zach added, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Your mother raised a remarkable daughter, and now that daughter is raising remarkable children of her own." On a warm summer evening 10 years after their wedding, Hannah and Zach sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The ranch had grown substantially now, spanning 500 acres with a respectable herd of cattle, several horses, and a reputation for quality that extended beyond the territory. "I got a letter from the Callahans today," Hannah said, handing Zach a cup of coffee. "Mr. Callahan is finally retiring. They're moving to Oregon to be near their eldest daughter and her family." "End of an era," Zach commented. "I owe that man a great deal. If he hadn't given me that job, I might never have been in Willow Creek that day." Hannah nodded, thinking of the chain of events that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder about all the little choices and chances that lead us to the important moments in our lives?" "Sometimes," Zach admitted. "But then I look at you and the children, and I don't question it anymore. Some things are just meant to be." Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as Will helped Alina climb the old oak tree in the yard, his movements careful and protective of his younger sister. "You remember what you told me once about being a ranch hand?" she asked. "You said it gets lonely on the trail and a man starts to wonder if there might be more to life." "I remember," Zach said, taking her hand. I was already falling in love with you then, though I barely dared to hope you might feel the same. Hannah smiled. And now look at us. A home, children, land of our own. Did you ever imagine all this when you were riding the trails alone? Never, he answered honestly. I thought maybe someday I'd have a small cabin somewhere, a few acres, but this. He gestured to encompass their home, the ranch, their children. This is beyond anything I could have dreamed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Will and Alina raced to the porch, breathless from their play. "Pa," Will said excitedly, "can you tell us again about how you met Ma? The real story, not the short one." Zach grinned at his son's enthusiasm. It was a favorite bedtime tale in their household. "Well, now," he began, settling back in his chair as the children perched on the porch steps. "It was a warm spring day in 1883, and I was just passing through a little town called Willow Creek." Hannah watched her husband's face as he told the story, his expression softening as he described seeing her at her mother's grave. Though he kept the tale appropriate for young ears, the emotion in his voice conveyed the depth of that first meeting. "She was crying over her mother's grave alone," he told the children, "and something told me I couldn't just ride on by. So I stayed with her until the sun went down." "And then you fell in love," Alina prompted, already knowing the ending. Zach smiled, reaching for Hannah's hand. "Not right away, Pumpkin, but when the right person comes into your life, love has a way of growing before you even realize it's happening." "Like a seed," Will suggested thoughtfully. "Exactly like a seed," Hannah agreed. "It starts small, but with care and time, it grows into something strong and beautiful." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, the family moved inside. The children were tucked into bed with kisses and prayers, and Hannah and Zach returned to the porch to enjoy the quiet of the evening. "They love that story," Hannah said, settling beside him on the porch swing. "It's a good one," Zach replied, his arm around her shoulders. "The day my life truly began." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant lowing of cattle. "I've been thinking," Zach said eventually. "Will's getting old enough to take on more responsibility around the ranch. Maybe next year we could take that trip you've always wanted." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "To see the ocean," he nodded. "We could take the train to San Francisco, see the Pacific, maybe stay for a couple of weeks. The ranch can spare us for that long, especially if we go in the quiet season." "Oh, Zach," Hannah breathed, her eyes shining with excitement. "I'd love that." "Then it's settled," he said, pleased by her reaction. "Our first real adventure together that doesn't involve cattle or childbirth." Hannah laughed, leaning into his embrace. "We've had plenty of adventures right here, but I admit, seeing the ocean with you would be a dream come true." As the night deepened around them, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief at her mother's grave to the fullness of life they now shared, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen. "I love you, Zachary Jenson," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome despite the lines that a decade of ranch work had etched around his eyes. "And I love you, Hannah Jenson," he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Until the sun goes down on our last day together." In the years that followed, the Jenson family continued to thrive. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for its quality cattle and fair business practices. Will grew into a fine young man who shared his father's affinity for ranching and his mother's sharp mind. Alina, spirited and determined, showed an unexpected talent for horses, training some of the finest mounts in the territory. Hannah and Zach did make their journey to the Pacific, the first of several trips they would take together as the ranch's prosperity allowed. They saw the ocean, just as Hannah had dreamed, standing hand in hand on a California beach as waves crashed against the shore and seagulls wheeled overhead. "It's even more magnificent than I imagined," Hannah had whispered, awed by the endless expanse of water meeting sky at the horizon. "Worth waiting for?" Zach had asked, watching her face light up with wonder. "Yes," she had replied simply, "like all the best things in life." Their love, born in a cemetery on a sorrowful day, continued to deepen with each passing season. There were arguments and difficult times, as in any marriage, but the foundation they had built proved strong enough to weather any storm. On their 25th wedding anniversary, with their children grown and the ranch secure, Hannah and Zach returned to the cemetery where they had first met. The simple wooden marker that had once stood over Mercer's grave had long since been replaced by a proper headstone, the inscription reading "Beloved Wife and Mother, Never Forgotten." Hannah placed a bouquet of wildflowers, purple lupine and yellow balsam root, just as she had that first day on the grave. Zach stood beside her, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes as kind as ever. "Hello, Mama," Hannah said softly. "It's been 25 years since you left us, but not a day goes by that I don't think of you. You would be so proud of your grandchildren, and I think you would approve of the life Zach and I have built together." Zach placed his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Thank you," he said to the headstone, "for raising such an extraordinary daughter, and if you had anything to do with guiding me to her that day, I'm eternally grateful." As they stood together in the peaceful cemetery, Hannah thought of all the twists and turns their lives had taken. How a moment of profound grief had led to a lifetime of joy, how a solitary cowboy with a kind heart had changed everything. "I'm glad you stayed that day," she said to Zach as they finally turned to leave, "until the sun went down." "Best decision I ever made," he replied, taking her hand in his. "And one I've never regretted for a single moment." Hand in hand, they walked out of the cemetery toward home, their shadows stretching long in the golden light of the setting sun, two lives intertwined by chance, bound by choice, and sustained by a love that had begun in the unlikeliest of places. In the quiet moments of their later years, when the ranch work was mostly in Will's capable hands and their days had a gentler pace, Hannah and Zach would often sit together on their porch, watching the Montana sunset. Sometimes they would talk about the past, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared. Other times they would simply enjoy the comfortable silence that comes from decades of companionship. Their family had grown. Will had married a schoolteacher from Helena, and they had 3 children of their own who filled the ranch with laughter and energy. Eleanor had surprised everyone by falling in love with a young doctor who had come to Willow Creek to establish a practice. They lived in town but visited the ranch frequently with their twin sons. "Did you ever imagine we'd be grandparents to 5 children?" Hannah asked Zach one evening as they watched their grandchildren playing in the yard, much as their own children had done years before. "Never," Zach admitted with a smile. "When I was riding solo across Wyoming, I couldn't see past the next horizon, let alone to this blessed life." Hannah took his hand, noting how it had changed over the years, the skin rougher, the knuckles more prominent but still strong and capable. Her own hands showed similar signs of aging, the evidence of a life fully lived. "We've been fortunate," she said softly. "Beyond measure," Zach agreed. As twilight deepened around them and the children were called inside, Hannah thought once more of that day in the cemetery, of the solitary grief that had seemed unbearable at the time. How strange that from such sorrow could come such joy, a lifetime of love, family, and purpose. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to her husband. "For what?" Zach asked, his blue eyes still bright despite the creases at their corners. "For staying with me that day. For seeing someone who needed comfort and offering it freely. For loving me through all these years." Zach leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, a gesture as familiar and essential as breathing after almost 4 decades together. "Thank you," he replied, "for letting me stay. For giving a wandering cowboy a place to belong. For loving me better than I deserved." As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Hannah and Zach Jenson remained on their porch, two souls joined by a chance encounter at a grave site, their lives a testament to the enduring power of kindness, courage, and love. And in Willow Creek Cemetery, where wildflowers still bloomed each spring around Mercer's headstone, the story remained of a grieving daughter, a compassionate cowboy, and the sunset that marked the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime.